You're listening to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast, celebrating unapologetic greatness, proudly promoting meritocracy, and daring to be different by design. Here's your host, Rob Crum, ready to take your construction management performance to the next level.
Welcome, Team GSD, to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast. Happy Monday, January 20th, 2025. What a great day it's going to be. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Presidential Inauguration Day. Congratulations, President Trump. College football national title game, and not to be overlooked, yes, episode 1 of this podcast, where we're going to discuss my number one rule. Truthfully, this is probably going to get released a little later in the week, but the reason's fitting, given that it's an evergreen statement you will hear often in the future episodes, and even briefly mentioned later in this episode. Don't be in a hurry to say something is done. I was targeting getting released on the 20th, but as I went through the process for the first time, worked through some of the kinks, I realized that I'd be rushing a subpar product. So, as it is most often the case, it can often pay to take a little longer and complete the task to a much higher level. So, with that in mind, I apologize for the delay, but I am excited to get this episode released. Another big reason for the delay in getting this released was the fact that I actually had a completely different topic selected and started, and then decided at the last minute to switch topics. I did this because I thought it was extremely important to discuss this first and foremost. Since a lot of future episodes will mention this rule, I felt it important to explain it now so that moving forward everyone understands what I'm referencing. Okay. Before we get started, let me get the corporate disclaimer out of the way. The opinions expressed on this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not represent those of any former or current employers. Nice. Thank you, producer Noah. I appreciate you putting that up there. All right, Team GSD, let's go. Okay, rule number 1. People are lazy, stupid, or a combination of both. But first, before you start sending me hate mail, calling me the biggest jerk in the world, and how cynical of a statement, etc., let me say, there was a period of time earlier in my career where I deliberately and thoughtfully took the opposite approach. I intentionally went into interactions with people with the mindset that they're doing the best they can and giving me their best effort and the best end product. What I soon realized, probably only after a few months, was this most often was not the case. And if I didn't adjust my management style accordingly, I'd be setting myself up for failure. So, here I am today taking a drastically different approach. This actually reminds me of the great Thomas Sowell's book, Conflict of Visions. Whereas the prior approach I took, where I believed everyone's efforts were noble and sincere, are in alignment with what he calls the unconstrained vision. With this vision, you essentially take the position that things, including humans, are perfectible. If just the right approach is taken, if just the right people are in charge, you get the idea. The opposite vision is obviously called the constrained vision, which believes that humans are not perfectible, that we are inherently flawed creatures and steps must be taken to manage, govern, whatever, with that understanding and to that constraint. I'm going to dedicate an entire episode to this topic later, so I don't want to get bogged down here, but I did find the parallels to this topic to be interesting. Another way to understand this rule without getting your undies in a wad is to make sure you don't start the story in the middle. Let's start at the beginning and set the table with an example that anyone with kids will understand perfectly. With that, let me start by asking a simple question. What are the 2 very important things that we try to give to our kids to ensure they can be successful and highly productive members of society as adults? First and foremost, we try to educate them. So innately, we understand that we are not born with knowledge. Knowledge must be learned. We're not born knowing what 1 plus 1 is, knowing multiplication tables, knowing how the Roman Empire fell, etc., etc. We have to learn these things. We go to school and we get educated. So when I say people are lazy and stupid, that's addressing the stupid. Next item, lazy. What's the other thing we try to give our kids? Hear it all the time. What's the phrase? I want to instill in my kids a good work ethic. Think about the 14, 15-year-old kid working on a summer job on a farm, starting at sunrise and going strong until after sunset. Then the dad comes to pick up his son, and the owner of the farm might grab the kid's dad and say something like, "You really instilled great work ethic in this kid. Great job teaching him this young and giving him that grit." So again, we understand just based on the need to instill these qualities in our kids that we are not born with the hard work genetic in us, that it is not inherent to us as human beings. So both hard work and knowledge are not characteristics we have naturally in us. They need to be provided to us. They need to be instilled in us, and they need to be taught to us. So again, when I say people are lazy, stupid, or a combination of both, please don't take it the wrong way. I'm not trying to insult everyone. And let me say bluntly, I am not exempt of this rule. I just have a self-awareness and an understanding of it so that I can leverage it to my advantage to ensure it's a benefit to me and my projects and not a detriment. Remember, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. There are two sides to every coin. Okay, now that that's out of the way, and with the understanding that I can have no impact whatsoever on whatever knowledge or work ethic you've attained to this part of your life or career, let me say this. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you apply the principles I'm going to explain next, you will also be able to leverage this rule to your advantage too. Okay, now let's talk about managing to rule number 1. But first and foremost, let me make a very, very important distinction. You only want to manage to rule number 1 externally. This will include architects, engineers, owners, vendors, most importantly, subcontractors. By managing externally to rule number 1, you will be micromanaging, but you'll be micromanaging issues, not people. You'll basically be applying the principles of broken windows policing to the management of your projects, which is to say, manage things to the smallest level possible, which will eliminate the small issues from becoming the big issues. Let me say this as well, because it's important to hear. As you will manage this role to different levels, to different people, right? Just by default. I'm not saying manage to rule number 1 to the 1000th degree with every person and every issue you deal with. That would be unattainable. As you naturally work with people, you'll start to understand that, okay, this person's phenomenal. They're on top of their game. They work hard. They know what they're talking about. They deliver a good product. I can manage to rule number 1 to them to a very small degree, if at all, right? Heck, they might even be helping you manage to rule number 1 with others. And then there's other people that, my, oh my, oh my, you're going to have to manage to this role until you are blue in the face. You just are. If you want a successful project, you are going to have to apply this to the maximum degree possible for everything they do. Everything. Scrutinize and review everything, because chances are they just took the easiest, laziest way of doing it possible with as minimal thought and effort as possible. So you're going to have to drastically manage them to this rule. I'll give you an example. I have an electric project manager right now I'm working with. Phenomenal. Just phenomenal. I'm working with them on a highly electric intensive project, and anything that comes up, I can just default to him and say, "Mr. Electrician, do you mind explaining this to the group?" And he's got it. He knows it inside, outside, backwards, forward, sideways, every way to Saturday and 3 ways to Sunday. If I ask him something, if I request something, boom, it comes back thorough, comes back on time, complete and accurate. Conversely, I'm a project manager for a different trade on another project. Complete opposite. I'd imagine this individual could get lost going to the bathroom of their own house. And I am not being hyperbolic. I mean, if I don't look at everything with this person, if I don't scrutinize everything, I can 100% count on errors. Therefore, I know going into any interaction with either of these people, I'm going to have to manage them differently. I'm going to have to apply this rule to them on a different degree. But most people are not my electrical project manager. Most people are like water. Whereas water takes the path of least resistance, so do most people you'll work with. We've all been on a project where there's a leak in the ceiling's been noticed. Probably a stained ceiling tile, stain in the drywall ceiling. That does not mean that leak came directly above the location of the stained tile, though. The leak probably could have came 100 feet or more down the building somewhere. Came down a joist, came down here, obstruction there, dripped over here, rolled down this, another obstruction, dodged it. It's going to find the path of least resistance. And then by the time it does all that ducking and dodging, dipping, comes down and you notice it at your ceiling tile, 200-300 feet away from where it's actually coming in the building. So by its nature, it takes the path of least resistance. Humans, unfortunately, in a lot of cases are built the same way. And that's okay. You just have to understand and manage to it, right? The vast majority of people are average. That's why it's called average. Most people are going to fall into the fact that they want to take that same path of least resistance. They want to do the minimal amount possible to say something's done. That is the majority of people, and candidly, you should be grateful for that. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how thankful you should be. But to be thankful, you'll have to have the correct perspective. Remember what I said earlier, there are two sides to every coin. If you have the correct perspective and don't get sidetracked by thoughts of unfairness, I'll discuss this in a minute, and you start putting in the required effort and begin applying the next level construction management principles, I guarantee you will begin to lap all of those average people I mentioned earlier. Natural as it can be, you can't start looking at it going, oh, this is unfair, blah, 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 blah. First of all, as will be explained in another future episode, I'm not here to manage my projects on emotions and feelings. So you can take that unfair talk and get the hell out of my office with it. No kidding, life's not fair. But that unfairness, two sides to the coin. You can either look at it from the perspective of, oh, boo-hoo, this isn't fair. I have to do all these extra things in order to get ahead. And my friends doing the same job aren't working as much as me. And they aren't doing tasks to the same degree as me. Why? Did you ever notice how when you cry about unfairness with why, it sounds a lot like wah? So you must keep the correct perspective and say, oh my goodness, you guys are making it so easy for me to separate myself from you, to look like a hero to my clients and architects and people I work with because of you. Because of the minimal amount of effort and quality of work you provide. They're gift wrapping it for you. Putting on a plate saying, here you go, here's a gift. I don't work hard, here's a gift. I do the minimum to say it's done, here's a gift. So when you start looking at it from that perspective, and you start to understand the level of effort and quality of work that the vast majority of your colleagues are going to have, that your competition's going to have, and you start exploiting that and leveraging that to your benefit, and you start managing others externally to it, sky's the limit. Now, let me get something else out of the way here, because once you start managing to rule number one, you will begin to hear things like this. That's not your job. That's the fill in the blank, the superintendent's job, the architect's job, the engineer's job, the whoever, the owner, whoever it is. It's not your job to do that. But remember one thing. It may not be your job, but it will be your problem. That is a foundational statement to understand when managing to rule number one. Let me say it again. It may not be your job, but it will be your problem. When you understand and embrace that statement, you will see the undeniable reasoning behind managing to rule number one. And once you start managing to rule number one, oh my goodness, it is an addiction. It builds on itself. It's incredible because you start to realize is that you have the ability by doing this you will start to lower your affliction to the role because of two reasons. First, it requires hard work, but it requires more effort. It requires you to get off your ass, get out of bed, and get to work. Start double and triple checking not just your work, but other people's work. I jokingly say, write it in crayon for people. So you're going to, by default, work more. You are. I'm not going to lie to anyone here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Remember, this is not the status quo construction management podcast. This is the next level construction management podcast. And a key component to this is working harder than your colleagues, working harder than the competition. So one organic benefit of applying rule number 1 by managing others to this role is you will start to exempt yourself to a large degree from the rule. Second benefit, as you put in that required effort and you start to double and triple check all this stuff, guess what? Now your knowledge of the project goes through the roof. So now your level of stupidity related to the role is also greatly minimized. So you are naturally going to exempt yourself to an extremely large degree from the rule simply by managing other people to it. Now again, let me reiterate, very, very, very important distinction. When I say manage to rule number 1, I am talking about externally. I'm not talking about internally. By internally, obviously your people, your personnel in your company. And that can be up and down the ladder. This is especially important to understand if you're in a middle to senior level management position and you manage down the ladder. If you're a senior PM or project executive and you're managing PMs, project engineers, APMs, whatever the roles may be, even in the support roles like estimating, you do not want to manage them to rule number 1. You don't. And that is where you get into incorrect micromanaging. And by that, I mean micromanaging people and not issues. You want to micromanage issues, not people. And when you're managing rule number 1 internally, you are micromanaging people. When you are managing rule number 1 externally, you are micromanaging issues. Now, this may lead you to ask a very good question. How do we, if we're not managing our people rule number 1, how do we manage our people? And more importantly, how do we prevent them from falling into rule number 1? Simple answer. Internally, you're going to train your people to have the skills necessary to manage others externally to rule number 1. So if they're managing to rule number 1 externally, they will then again organically, just like yourself, start to exempt themselves to that same large degree. But the key component is that you have to train them correctly. They need to know the correct way to review a submittal. They need to know the correct way to review a pay app. They need to know the correct way to review an RFI. And I'm not talking about the candy-ass way that I see so often. I'm talking about doing these tasks with 3 core components in mind: constructability, form, and function. Again, another episode for another time, but they need to be taught these skills at an extremely high level in order to manage others correctly to them. And once they learn these skills, and once you teach them these skills, you will not have to worry about them being lazy or stupid, because they will be limiting that exposure in the same way you've limited it to yourself. Therefore, the training and the education of them, giving them the skills required to manage others to rule number 1, is how you manage them. Here's another key: understanding your level of foundational influence on both internal and external personnel. External personnel, that is to say people who don't work for the same company as you, have very little to no ability to determine or correct their level of effort or quality of work on a foundational level. Just by the obvious nature of the statement, they work for another company and are going to do as they please or as that company directs them to. So all you can do is manage these people to rule number 1 on an issues by issues basis, and to whatever degree necessary you deem to ensure the issues are addressed to your standards. Internally, conversely, you have much more of an ability and opportunity, and I'd argue responsibility, if nothing else, to your projects, to set a higher standard at a foundational level. With that being said, you do not want to browbeat your staff on every little thing they do. That's the wrong approach. That's micromanaging people. Because internally, right, if I have a project engineer working for me, or a project manager, I can, to the largest degree possible, set standards. I can educate them. I can train them to those standards, which will in turn allow them to manage externally to rule number one. That is foundational management. Now, it's up to me to hold them to those standards, and it's up to them to meet the standards. But as long as you have the right people in your organization, this is easy. But having the correct people is another key component. And if the people you have won't step up to the plate after you've trained them, after you've educated them, after you've set the standard, then simply put, you have the wrong people. This leads to another huge mistake companies can make, and one that's a huge problem in the industry in general, which is the acceptance of low standards. But when understood and exploited, can be a huge benefit to you and your company. I believe this low standard has become the acceptable nature because of two primary reasons. First, companies are afraid that if they hold people to a higher standard, then that person may realize other companies aren't asking them to do as much in that same position and leave their company. To that, I say, hey, think about it. You're concerned that an average, and I would probably argue more times than not, a below average employee who lacks the motivation to learn the skills that are being provided to them isn't willing to take advantage of that opportunity and chooses instead to leave your company and join a competitor? Where's the downside? You just lost a subpar employee and can now replace them with someone more motivated, and that subpar employee has just made your competition weaker. Talk about a win-win-win. And trust me, you will find people that will strive to develop the necessary skills to reach that higher standard, and who will then utilize those skills to continuously meet and exceed the standards. You will. They are out there. But when you hold no one to a higher standard because you're afraid of turnover, or the second reason I see cited most often, burnout. On a future episode, I'm going to go into great detail about what I call the myth of burnout. Now, this isn't to say that I don't believe burnout exists, but rather that it's a completely preventable with three things present: purpose, consistency, and perspective. If you have those three components, you will not have to worry about burnout. And you won't have to hear what I do all the time. Oh, we don't want to push them too hard because we might burn them out. Okay, I'll get into that later, but trust me, that is a complete fairy tale excuse. And candidly, if it's a reason someone were to leave you or not apply themselves to this principle, then again, I'd say you're better off without them. So now let's look at the impact of this on a company-wide level. If you have an average to below average project engineer or project manager who is unwilling or unable to step up and meet the higher standard you set, and which would allow them to truly become an expert in what they do, what are they going to be for the rest of their career? What are they going to be as they progress from a PE to a PM, from a PM to a senior PM or project executive? How are they going to train the next group of people, that next generation? I'll tell you, they're going to train the next group, that next generation, to be average to below average. Why? Because they are going to be average to below average for their entire career. Why is that? Because that's been the accepted standard. You've allowed good enough to be good enough. Raise the bar. Raise the standard. And if they can't or won't meet it, damn it, find someone that will. That sounds harsh, I get it. But we have to hold people to a higher standard if we want our company to perform at a higher standard. If we want our division to perform at a higher standard. If we want our projects to perform at a higher standard. But in order to demand that standard is met, we have to give them the tools, the education, training, and support needed so they can meet the standard. A standard that will allow them to be the flag bearers to carry that on to the next generation in your company. That's how you create generational change in your company and the industry. That's how you get people to move through their career and they're no longer average to below average. They're now the tip of the spear project managers. They're now the tip of the spear senior project managers, and so on. And as they elevate in their careers, they will bring that next generation, the next group up to that level. So you can either have a company of average to below average people who manage to that status quo, or you could have a workforce of people who meet and set the higher standard. Okay, to recap the episode. Man, talk about coming to the finish line, 100 miles per hour. Okay, to recap, rule number 1, people are lazy, stupid, or a combination of both. To what degree will be up to you to determine on a person-to-person basis, but externally, you need to manage people to this rule. Internally, train your people to have the necessary skills, knowledge, and work ethic to manage people outside your organization to this rule. And as you do this internally, you will set such a higher standard for the performance in your company, division, branch of your company, that the skills within that are going to be so far beyond what others are achieving, it will amaze you. Okay, guys, any questions, comments, please shoot me an email. I'd love your feedback. I'm at comments.nextlevelmanagement@gmail.com. Love to hear your feedback. Please subscribe to the channel, share the channel, like the channel, and I will talk to everyone next week with episode 2. God bless America, and as always, Team GSD, be relentless.